What's a wedding without food? Sure, love. But that's not the topic today. Sadly, weddings aren't what they once were. We've traded elegant entrees for sheer convenience. Here are 50 forgotten wedding recipes no one makes anymore. Delicate, light, and undeniably fancy, this dainty sandwich was once a staple at elegant wedding receptions. Served on soft, crustless white bread, silver fluff sandwiches combined the subtle sweetness of marshmallow creme with the mild saltiness of cream cheese, creating a smooth and airy filling. These were the kind of treats that whispered sophistication in an era when wedding menus leaned toward refinement over extravagance. Originating in the early 20th century, these sandwiches were a popular choice for bridal luncheons and afternoon receptions. The symbolism was fitting: white, fluffy, and pure, just like the ideals surrounding marriage at the time. Brides wanted their tables to reflect elegance, and nothing said dainty quite like a platter of these pillowy tea sandwiches cut into perfect little triangles. Despite their charm, silver fluff sandwiches eventually vanished from wedding spreads. Changing tastes played a role. By the 1970s, lighter finger foods gave way to more substantial hors d'oeuvres. Marshmallow creme and cream cheese also lost their novelty as newer, trendier ingredients took center stage. And let's be honest, sticky, creamy sandwiches don't always hold up well in a buffet setting. For decades, no formal wedding spread was complete without an aspic. Clear, shimmering, and suspended in perfection, this gelatin-based dish was a mark of high society. Celery aspic with sherry was particularly popular at refined wedding receptions, offering a chilled, savory contrast to the heavier fare of the time. It was elegant, it was delicate, and above all, it was sophisticated. At least, that's what the host wanted guests to believe. Aspic had long symbolized wealth and refinement. In the days before refrigeration was widespread, only the well-to-do could afford the labor-intensive process of making gelatin from scratch. By the early 20th century, with the advent of powdered gelatin, what was once a status symbol became an accessible delicacy. The combination of celery, gelatin, and a splash of sherry added a touch of indulgence, making it a common sight at wedding banquets. Yet, by the mid-century, the aspic craze began to wobble. Tastes shifted, and what once seemed refined started to feel outdated. Jiggling vegetables lost their appeal as fresher, more vibrant salads took over. By the 1970s, most guests preferred their celery crisp, not encased in a translucent mold. Smoked oysters wrapped in delicate layers of puff pastry were a highlight of elegant receptions, offering a bite-sized indulgence that symbolized prosperity and good fortune. Oysters had long been associated with abundance, and serving them at a wedding was a way of wishing the couple a life filled with wealth and plenty. And let's not forget their supposed reputation as an aphrodisiac, subtle but not unnoticed. Throughout the early 20th century, smoked oysters were an affordable delicacy, often canned and widely available. Combining them with buttery, flaky pastry elevated them from a simple seafood snack to a refined hors d'oeuvre fit for the most distinguished wedding spreads. These little parcels of flavor were served on silver trays, paired with champagne, and enjoyed by guests who wanted something sophisticated yet satisfying. But as culinary preferences evolved, so did wedding menus. By the 1980s, oysters were no longer an accessible treat. Rising costs and changing tastes pushed them off the appetizer table. Puff pastry remained, but it found new fillings, leaving smoked oysters behind. Luxury and excess defined wedding menus of the past, and few dishes embodied that spirit better than gilded deviled crab. This rich, golden-baked delicacy combined delicate lump crab meat with butter, breadcrumbs, and just the right amount of spice. Served in decorative crab shells, it was a statement dish, one that whispered of wealth, refinement, and a taste for the finer things in life. At high society weddings, the presence of seafood was a sign of prestige. Crab had long symbolized prosperity and good fortune, making it a fitting addition to wedding feasts. The gilded aspect wasn't just in name. Some variations featured a light dusting of paprika to mimic a golden crust, while others were brushed with butter to achieve a shimmering finish under the broiler. It was elegant, indulgent, and, for a time, surprisingly affordable. In the mid-20th century, crab was abundant in coastal areas, making it a practical yet impressive choice for wedding menus. But as overfishing reduced supply and prices soared, this once accessible dish became a rarity. By the 1980s, seafood-heavy hors d'oeuvres were being replaced by more budget-friendly alternatives. The labor-intensive preparation didn't help its chances either. Elegance was once measured in hors d'oeuvres, and nothing said upper class quite like caviar. In the mid-20th century, wedding receptions weren't complete without delicate bites of caviar mousse, elegantly nestled in hollowed-out cucumber cups. Light, creamy, and just briny enough to make an impression, this dish was reserved for celebrations that spared no expense. Caviar had long been associated with wealth and refinement, making it an obvious choice for wedding menus that aimed to impress. But the pairing with cucumber wasn't just about aesthetics. The crisp freshness of the vegetable balanced the richness of the mousse, creating a sophisticated contrast. It was a dish designed for leisurely cocktail hours, best enjoyed with a glass of chilled champagne and polite conversation. Yet, despite its association with luxury, caviar mousse quietly faded from wedding menus. Rising costs played a major role. Caviar, once plentiful and relatively affordable, became a delicacy priced out of reach for most couples. Tastes changed as well. By the 1990s, richer cream-based appetizers were making way for more contemporary, globally inspired bites. In an era when presentation was just as important as flavor, wedding menus featured dishes that doubled as decor. Radish and butter roses were a perfect example, delicate, handcrafted, and arranged with the precision of a florist. These edible garnishes symbolized prosperity and new beginnings, with radishes representing vitality and butter reflecting abundance. For couples looking to start their marriage on the right note, these tiny sculpted roses made a fitting addition to the table. Carved radishes had been a staple in European cuisine for centuries, and by the early 20th century they became a fixture at elegant American weddings. The process was simple but impressive. Thinly sliced radishes were carefully fanned out to resemble blooming roses, often paired with piped butter rosettes for contrast. Not only was this dish visually stunning, but it was also incredibly affordable. Radishes were inexpensive, butter was readily available, and the labor required was a small price to pay for the elegance it added to the reception spread. Yet, as wedding menus modernized, elaborate garnishes like these fell out of favor. The time-consuming preparation couldn't compete with faster, more convenient appetizers, and guests were less inclined to admire a radish when mini quiches and shrimp cocktails were on the table. During the mid-20th century, one dish stood out among the rest: a crisp endive and grapefruit salad delicately dressed in champagne vinegar. This wasn't your everyday garden salad. It was a perfect balance of bitter, sweet, and tangy, designed to awaken the palate before the main course. For couples who wanted a touch of sophistication on their wedding menu, this dish checked all the boxes. Symbolism played a role in its popularity. Grapefruit, with its vibrant color and bright acidity, was often associated with vitality and prosperity, while endive, a cultivated leafy green, was considered a delicacy, signifying good taste. Champagne vinegar added an air of celebration, because what's a wedding without a little champagne, even in salad form? With only a handful of ingredients, this dish was both affordable and effortlessly chic. Despite its charm, the salad quietly disappeared from wedding menus as the decades passed. The rise of heavier, creamier dressings and more elaborate salads pushed this minimalist dish into obscurity. By the 1980s, people wanted bold, indulgent flavors, and a citrusy, slightly bitter salad just didn't stand a chance against ranch-soaked romaine or pasta-heavy creations. Wedding menus have long embraced the art of contrast: sweet and savory, creamy and crisp, indulgent yet refined. Few dishes captured that balance better than Pear and Roquefort timbales, an elegant appetizer that once graced high-end receptions. A delicate mold of ripe pear puree, enriched with cream and balanced by the bold bite of Roquefort cheese, this dish was the definition of sophisticated indulgence. In French cuisine, the pairing of pears and Roquefort symbolized harmony, a fitting metaphor for marriage. The pear, with its natural sweetness and smooth texture, represented gentleness and prosperity, while Roquefort, one of the world's oldest blue cheeses, stood for strength and complexity. It was a culinary marriage as carefully arranged as the wedding itself. Despite its refined nature, Pear and Roquefort timbales didn't survive the changing tides of wedding trends. The labor-intensive process of molding, chilling, and unmolding the dish made it impractical for large-scale receptions. As wedding menus shifted toward simpler, crowd-pleasing options, blue cheese also fell out of favor with more sensitive palates. Long before farm-to-table dining became trendy, wedding menus often featured dishes rooted in tradition and practicality. One such classic was a dandelion green salad, drizzled with warm bacon dressing. It was a dish that combined humble, foraged greens with the rich, smoky depth of bacon fat, creating a balance of rustic simplicity and bold flavor. Dandelion greens carried symbolic meaning. Hardy, resilient, and thriving in even the most difficult conditions, they represented endurance, making them a fitting metaphor for marriage. They were also widely available and completely free for those willing to gather them. The dressing, made by whisking vinegar, sugar, and bacon drippings into a tangy, savory emulsion, turned the slightly bitter greens into something truly special. It was a dish with roots in German and Appalachian cuisine, frequently appearing at weddings where frugality and flavor went hand in hand. Yet, as time passed, dandelion greens fell out of favor. By the late 20th century, they were dismissed as just weeds, and wedding menus moved toward more refined, less bitter salad greens. Weddings have always been about bringing people together over food that feels special, even when made from humble ingredients. Sultana and almond rice was one such dish, a fragrant, slightly sweet side that once held a firm place on elegant wedding spreads. A mix of tender rice, plump golden sultanas, and crunchy toasted almonds, it was both simple and indulgent, striking the perfect balance between everyday fare and festive cuisine. Rice has long been a symbol of prosperity and fertility, which is why it was often thrown at newlyweds as they exited the church. But in this case, it was served on the plate rather than tossed in the air. The addition of sultanas, golden raisins, brought sweetness to the dish, symbolizing good fortune, while almonds represented strength and endurance. This wasn't just a side dish, it was a wish for a long, prosperous marriage. So why did it vanish from wedding menus? Changing tastes played a role. Savory rice dishes gradually replaced subtly sweet ones, and almonds became more expensive over time. By the late 20th century, this once popular dish had been overshadowed by buttered rolls and pasta salads. At one time, wedding menus often featured vegetables that were as refined as they were rare. Salsify, a root vegetable known as the oyster plant for its delicate, slightly briny flavor, was a prized ingredient in elegant wedding feasts. Paired with butter and a touch of nutmeg, it became a dish that exuded both comfort and sophistication. Salsify wasn't chosen for its taste. It had a deeper meaning. Root vegetables were often associated with stability and endurance, qualities every new marriage was hoped to embody. The subtle warmth of nutmeg added an aromatic touch, symbolizing luck and good fortune. It was a dish steeped in tradition, served at weddings where even the vegetables carried significance. Despite its former popularity, salsify quietly disappeared from wedding menus. One reason? It's not the most visually appealing vegetable. With its long, thin, and slightly knobby appearance, it was often mistaken for something best left in the garden. More importantly, as fresher, more vibrant vegetables like asparagus and baby carrots took over, salsify faded into obscurity. For generations, wedding feasts celebrated abundance, and few ingredients embodied that better than chestnuts. Once considered a luxurious yet practical ingredient, chestnuts found their way into wedding menus through rich, comforting dishes like scalloped chestnuts in Madeira cream. The combination of slow-cooked chestnuts bathed in a velvety, wine-infused sauce was a nod to both old-world elegance and the belief that food should be both nourishing and celebratory. Chestnuts had long been associated with prosperity, endurance, and warmth. qualities deemed essential for a lasting marriage. Madeira wine, known for its depth and complexity, carried its own symbolic weight, representing longevity and resilience. Together, these ingredients created a dish that was as rich in meaning as it was in flavor. It was served as a side dish, often accompanying roasted meats, lending an air of sophistication to even the simplest wedding receptions. So, why did this once-beloved dish vanish from the wedding table? The decline of chestnuts in American cooking played a major role. Once abundant, they became harder to source after the chestnut blight of the early 20th century. Meanwhile, the labor-intensive process of peeling and slow cooking them didn't fit into the faster-paced catering trends of modern weddings. There was a time when turtle was a highly prized dish at formal celebrations, including weddings. Slow braised in rich Burgundy wine with aromatic vegetables and herbs, this dish mirrored the sophistication of European cuisine while making use of a once-abundant ingredient. For centuries, turtle meat was considered both a luxury and a practical choice, particularly in coastal communities where it was readily available. Symbolism played a role in its appeal. Turtles represented longevity, wisdom, and resilience, ideal qualities for a marriage meant to last a lifetime. When paired with Burgundy wine, known for its depth and richness, the dish became an embodiment of indulgence and refinement. But despite its former prestige, braised turtle in Burgundy sauce is rarely, if ever, seen on wedding menus today. Conservation efforts and changing attitudes toward turtle consumption played a major role in its disappearance. As laws restricted the harvesting of wild turtles, alternative meats like beef and veal took their place. Over time, what was once a revered delicacy faded into culinary history, remembered more for its symbolism than its place at the dinner table. Opulence has always had a place at weddings, and few dishes embodied sheer extravagance quite like roast peacock. A centerpiece as much as a meal, this dish was once the ultimate display of wealth and grandeur. Served with its iridescent feathers, carefully reattached and gilded in delicate sheets of gold leaf, it was designed to impress. Historically, peacock was reserved for the nobility, symbolizing beauty, immortality, and even divine favor. In medieval and Renaissance weddings, it wasn't uncommon for the roasted bird to be presented fully feathered, sometimes even with its head upright, as if it had been brought back to life for the occasion. Gold leaf added an extra layer of luxury, making it clear that this was no ordinary feast. Despite its once lofty status, roast peacock disappeared from wedding menus. Part of the reason was the meat itself was tough and gamey, more suited for decoration than dining. As more tender and flavorful poultry like turkey and chicken became widely available, peacock's appeal faded. Conservation efforts also played a role, as the bird became more valued for its striking appearance than its place on the dinner table. For centuries, weddings were an opportunity to showcase the finest ingredients a family could afford, and few dishes captured that spirit better than trout in champagne cream with grapes. This elegant entree combined delicate freshwater fish with the richness of a velvety champagne sauce, punctuated by the burst of sweetness from fresh grapes. It was a dish fit for celebration, light yet indulgent, refined yet approachable. Trout carried deep symbolic meaning in wedding feasts. As a fish that thrived in clean, flowing waters, it represented purity and abundance, qualities a newlywed couple hoped to carry into their marriage. Champagne, long associated with luxury and festivity, elevated the dish, while grapes, a symbol of fertility and prosperity, completed the culinary metaphor. Yet, despite its charm, this dish eventually faded from wedding menus. The rise of heartier, more universally crowd-pleasing entrees like beef and chicken pushed delicate fish dishes to the margins. Grapes in a savory dish also became a harder sell as wedding menus shifted toward more conventional flavor pairings. In times past, wedding menus often featured dishes that carried deep symbolic weight. Stuffed dove in fig brandy glaze was one such creation, a dish steeped in meaning as much as flavor. Doves, long associated with love and fidelity, made a fitting choice for a wedding feast, while figs, a symbol of prosperity and fertility, reinforced the hopes for a fruitful marriage. Together, they created a dish that was as rich in tradition as it was in taste. This wasn't a dish meant for everyday meals. The doves were often stuffed with a blend of herbs, breadcrumbs, and sometimes even nuts, creating a complex, earthy filling. The fig brandy glaze added a touch of sweetness, balancing the gamey richness of the bird. In an era when every dish at a wedding carried significance, this one sent a clear message, wishing the newlyweds a union filled with love, loyalty, and abundance. But as time passed, stuffed dove quietly disappeared from wedding menus. The decline of small game in mainstream cooking played a role, as did changing tastes. Guests grew accustomed to larger, more familiar proteins like chicken or beef. And let's be honest, serving doves at a wedding could create some awkward symbolism when live ones were being released just moments before dinner. For generations, wedding menus reflected not just wealth, but culinary craftsmanship. One of the most refined dishes to grace the tables of high society receptions was sweetbread patties in pastry shells. A delicacy prized in French cuisine, sweetbreads, tender cuts from the thymus or pancreas of young calves, were considered the pinnacle of gourmet dining. When finely chopped, mixed with a velvety sauce, and baked into flaky pastry shells, they became a luxurious appetizer fit for the most elegant celebrations. Beyond their rich flavor, sweetbreads carried symbolic meaning. Organ meats had long been associated with vitality and strength, qualities seen as essential for a lasting marriage. Serving them at a wedding was about ensuring the couple's union was fortified from the very first bite. The delicate, buttery pastry served as a contrast, turning what could have been an intimidating ingredient into a dish of true sophistication. So why did this once-beloved delicacy disappear? For one, changing tastes. By the late 20th century, sweetbreads became a harder sell as diners moved away from organ meats in favor of leaner, more familiar proteins. Wedding feasts have always been about abundance, but in past centuries, that didn't always mean heavy seasoning or elaborate presentations. One of the most respected dishes on the table was boiled capon with white sauce, a dish that prized tenderness over theatrics. A capon, a specially fattened and castrated rooster, was considered the ultimate poultry choice for special occasions. Its meat was softer, more delicate, and far richer in flavor than a standard chicken, making it a staple at weddings where quality mattered more than showmanship. In medieval Europe, serving capon at a wedding was a sign of prosperity and refinement. These birds required extra care and time to raise, making them a luxury that set high-status meals apart. The white sauce, typically a velvety béchamel or velouté, added another layer of indulgence, turning an otherwise simple dish into something worthy of celebration. Yet, despite its prestigious past, boiled capon disappeared from wedding menus. One reason was time. Capons took months to properly raise, and as factory farming favored faster-growing birds, their availability declined. Plus, boiled poultry lacked the visual appeal of golden roasted meats. Few wedding desserts were as light, delicate, and ethereal as snow pudding with lemon sauce. A vision of pure white, this airy, gelatin-based dessert was once a favorite at elegant receptions. Made from whipped egg whites, sugar, and unflavored gelatin, it created a cloud-like texture that practically melted on the tongue. Drizzled with a tangy lemon sauce, it offered just the right balance of sweetness and tartness, refreshing yet sophisticated. Symbolically, snow pudding was a natural fit for weddings. Its white, fluffy appearance represented purity and new beginnings, making it a meaningful way to end a celebratory meal. The lemon sauce added a bright contrast, much like the ups and downs of marriage itself. Sweet, but with a little zing to keep things interesting. More importantly, it was an economical dessert. Eggs, sugar, and gelatin were inexpensive and widely available, making this dish an elegant choice without an extravagant price tag. By the 1960s, heavier, richer desserts like cheesecake and layer cakes took center stage, leaving behind lighter, more delicate options. Plus, whipping egg whites to perfection takes skill, a step that modern, convenience-focused baking largely abandoned. Raspberry flummery, a soft, velvety pudding-like dish, was a staple at refined receptions. Made by thickening fresh raspberries with a mixture of sugar, cream, and a touch of cornstarch or gelatin, it created a smooth, mousse-like consistency that felt luxurious without being heavy. Light, refreshing, and brightly flavored, it was the perfect way to end a wedding feast. Beyond its taste, flummery carried symbolic meaning. Berries, particularly raspberries, were seen as a symbol of kindness and good fortune, making them a fitting ingredient for a celebration of love. The dish itself, with its delicate, airy texture, represented new beginnings. Soft and malleable, much like a young marriage. And unlike more elaborate desserts, flummery was accessible. Raspberries could be foraged or purchased inexpensively, and the other ingredients were kitchen staples, making it an elegant yet economical choice. But as time passed, flummery lost its place on wedding menus. The rise of richer, more visually striking desserts like tiered cakes and chocolate mousses pushed this simple, old-fashioned dish into obscurity. Today, it's largely forgotten, replaced by confections that demand attention. Weddings have always called for dishes that feel just a little more special than everyday fare, and few desserts captured that sentiment better than almond pudding with rosewater syrup. Silky, nutty, and perfumed with floral notes, this dish was once a symbol of refinement. It was a dessert that evoked romance and tradition in every spoonful. Almonds had long been associated with good fortune and fertility, making them a natural choice for wedding feasts. Meanwhile, rosewater, with its delicate fragrance, symbolized love and beauty. Unlike lavishly frosted cakes or fruit-laden tarts, almond pudding was relatively simple to make. The ingredients, ground almonds, milk, sugar, and a thickening agent, were accessible, and the rosewater syrup added an air of luxury without an extravagant price tag. Despite its charm, this delicate dessert eventually faded from wedding menus. As tastes shifted toward richer, dairy-heavy confections like cheesecakes and buttercream-layered cakes, lighter puddings lost their appeal. Rosewater, once a common flavoring, also fell out of favor in Western cuisine. In a time when wedding desserts were as much about presentation as taste, coconut macaroon towers stood tall, literally. These golden, chewy confections, stacked into towering pyramids, were once a grand sight at wedding receptions. Their crisp exterior and moist coconut-packed interior offered a delightful contrast, making them both visually impressive and undeniably delicious. Macaroons carried deeper significance beyond their elegant appearance. Coconut, with its rich tropical flavor, symbolized prosperity and exotic luxury, while the act of stacking them into towering displays represented abundance and longevity. Best of all, macaroons were made with only a handful of ingredients: shredded coconut, egg whites, and sugar. Simple, affordable, and naturally gluten-free before that was even a selling point. Despite their once prized status, coconut macaroon towers gradually disappeared from wedding menus. By the mid-20th century, couples leaned toward more elaborate multi-tiered cakes, and individual bite-sized desserts became less common. Coconut itself also saw a decline in Western dessert trends, often replaced by richer chocolate-based sweets. Syllabub, a frothy, wine-infused cream dessert, was once the epitome of elegance at wedding feasts. Served in delicate glass goblets and topped with gold-dusted berries, it was a dessert that shimmered as much as the occasion itself. Light, airy, and just boozy enough to keep spirits high, Syllabub was a favorite at refined gatherings for centuries. Beyond its luxurious appearance, this dish carried deep symbolism. The gold-dusted berries represented prosperity and good fortune, while the whipped, cloud-like texture of the Syllabub itself symbolized joy and new beginnings. Traditionally made by whipping cream with sugar, lemon juice, and fortified wine or sherry, it was both indulgent and refreshingly light, a perfect way to end a rich meal. Best of all, it was affordable. The ingredients were simple, and the touch of gold leaf gave it an extravagant look without the extravagant cost. So why did this once-beloved dessert disappear? Changing palates played a role. By the 20th century, people gravitated toward firmer, more structured desserts like custards and cakes. The delicate nature of Syllabub made it tricky to prepare in advance, and its reliance on raw cream made it less practical for large-scale catering. Wedding confections have always been about artistry as much as flavor, and few desserts were as whimsical or as painstakingly detailed as marzipan hedgehogs. These tiny, hand-sculpted treats, made from sweet almond paste and delicately shaped into the form of hedgehogs, were once a charming highlight of European-inspired wedding spreads. Intricately crafted with almond slivers for spines and chocolate-dipped noses, they were as much decoration as dessert. Marzipan had long been associated with celebration and prosperity, making it a natural fit for weddings. Almonds symbolized fertility and good fortune, while the hedgehog, in various folk traditions, represented protection and resourcefulness, qualities every newlywed couple could appreciate. Beyond symbolism, these treats were a practical choice. Marzipan required no refrigeration, had a long shelf life, and could be molded days in advance, making them ideal for large wedding feasts. Despite their charm, marzipan hedgehogs eventually vanished from wedding menus. The rise of elaborate tiered cakes and more modern, visually striking desserts pushed traditional almond confections to the side. Additionally, marzipan's dense, slightly chewy texture wasn't for everyone. Many guests preferred lighter, creamier sweets. Layered, decadent, and bursting with warm spice, spiced plum trifle was once a show-stopping dessert at wedding receptions. This towering creation combined stewed plums infused with cinnamon and cloves, layered with soft sponge cake, rich custard, and freshly whipped cream. The result was a dessert that was both visually striking and deeply satisfying. Sweet, tart, creamy, and spiced all at once. Beyond its flavor, trifle carried deep symbolic meaning in wedding traditions. The layers represented the foundation of a strong marriage, each component building upon the next, while plums, often associated with longevity and wisdom, made for a fitting ingredient at such a momentous occasion. Spices like cinnamon and cloves symbolized warmth and passion, making the dish even more appropriate for a newlywed couple's first meal together. Despite its popularity, spiced plum trifle eventually faded from wedding menus. By the late 20th century, trifles were being replaced by more structured, tiered cakes that could serve as dramatic centerpieces. The labor-intensive process of layering multiple components made it impractical for wedding menus. Around the 60s and maybe the start of the early 2000s, around wintertime, you would really see cranberry pork tenderloin at funerals. This was a dish that got into communities with a preference for the sweet and savory things in life. The pork was slow-cooked, and slow-cooked food in general was really popping off around this time period thanks to how accessible slow cookers became for everything. Then it would be roasted with a glaze of thick, rich, and decadent cranberry sauce. Throw in some mustard and brown sugar, and you have a pretty contrasting flavor profile that keeps anyone's mind occupied. Still, as far as funerals go, this was a dish that was versatile and convenient. You could serve it in small portions, have it as a buffet-style meal, or save it for later. Speaking of which, that's something I really want to talk about. See, a lot of these dishes might seem overly large for a funeral, right? Nobody was thinking, hey, that bereaved family will definitely finish this up on the spot. The idea behind making large batches of heavy meals like this was so that the family of the deceased wouldn't have to worry about food. They could just coast by on leftovers from the funeral for a while. Okay, so this next dessert's reputation speaks for itself. I'm talking about snickerdoodle cookies. This bad boy was timeless. You could be 5 or you could be 45 and still enjoy the soft, chewy snickerdoodles coated in cinnamon sugar, which gave them a sweet, slightly spicy flavor. And trust me, it was impossible to resist. Snickerdoodles are considered a classic American cookie, with a history that dates back to the late 1800s. 2 centuries later, they're still a fan favorite. Now, you could get these at many popular bakeries, but nothing beats what Granny whipped up in minutes back in the day. This biscuit was the star of Grandma's cookie jar, and always the first one to disappear. Bouchées de Noël are one festive Christmas dessert that puts even the most reserved person into a jolly mood. You know, everyone has a friend or two who says, Christmas isn't really my scene. You could convince them by mentioning that these were being served. Just like that, you had a +1 to any Christmas party, and trust us, back then there were a lot. We are referring to the 1960 to 1980s era when bouchées de Noël were really hard to miss. A good bouchée de Noël is a flourless chocolate cake made with chocolate whipped cream. Bakeries often use confectioner's sugar and sprinkle it all over the log-shaped cake to resemble falling Christmas snow. Yeah, they would go all out with this one. Probably paid off just as well considering how bakeries would always be sold out of these on Christmas Eve. Unfortunately, eggnog and lemon meringue cake seems to be in these days instead of delights like this one. A beloved American potluck staple, pickle wraps combine the tangy crunch of dill pickles with the smooth texture of cream cheese and the savory taste of ham or corned beef. Originating in the mid-20th century as a quick and easy snack, this dish involves wrapping a cream cheese-slathered slice of meat around a whole or sliced dill pickle. The popularity of pickle wraps peaked in the 1970s and 1980s, valued for their simplicity and the contrasting flavors that appealed to a broad audience. The preparation is straightforward. Spread cream cheese on the meat, place a pickle on one edge, and roll it up before slicing it into bite-sized pieces. Despite their simplicity, pickle wraps were a go-to for their bold flavor and easy preparation. Chicken croquettes. At your Friday school party, sure? At a sleepover with your friends when you're all getting your drink on or setting up a movie night? I get it. I've been there. At funerals? Man, your kids must be really picky. Then again, I'm not one to say anything about that. I ate fried chicken at a funeral once. Croquettes were, at least I hope they were an idea that came from the same mindset. Lots of people have different definitions of what counts as comfort food, and to a lot of those folks, a crunchy bite of chicken is just as heartwarming as a sweet spoonful of fruit glaze or lasagna. However, there started to be real concerns about health as time went on in America. People realized that they simply were eating too much of the stuff and needed to tone it down. As convenient, easy, and attractive as chicken croquettes were, they just weren't something that could really last the long haul. In the start, like around the 80s and 70s, they had the benefit of being really convenient. But now that you have frozen alternatives for everything, there's no reason to even pick these anymore. Okay, so this next one was a staple on Grandma's dinner table during the holidays. Yeah, I'm talking about the spice cake. Come on, there's no way you don't remember this bad boy. Spice cake had been a beloved dessert for centuries, with origins tracing back to medieval Europe. The use of spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves in cakes became popular during the 18th and 19th centuries after these ingredients were brought to America. Someone's grandma decided to add spices to an old-fashioned cake batter, and let's just say we're extremely grateful for it. This cake shaped many childhoods as its aroma marked the start of fall and holiday season. From Thanksgiving days to Christmas mornings, this one was always sitting in the kitchen for anyone who wanted a taste of the season. Blackberry pies were already something people loved, and when Marionberry pies came and took that to the next level, everybody welcomed it with open arms, mouths, and wallets. Most popularly cited in the Pacific Northwest, Marionberry pies were pie crusts filled with marionberries, which are an offshoot of your typical blackberry. This pie tends to be much more rich in taste. You are looking at little flavor grenades, really. Pies like this were something you would find on every bakery shelf in Oregon initially, but the infectious taste made its way to other states soon enough. Marionberries were just first grown and found in Oregon, so it started more there, but everyone else wanted a slice of the pie too, we guess. A thicker consistency than usual, along with a sweeter and fruitier taste, people loved this version so much they started using marionberries in other things too, like jam. Nowadays, there are some Oregon farms that grow the berry, but its production has gone down a lot, and as a result, so has the craze for these wonderful pies. Beef tongue canapés, a bold and rich appetizer, consist of thinly sliced beef tongue served on small pieces of bread or crackers, often accompanied by a tangy sauce like horseradish or mustard. This appetizer gained popularity in the early to mid-20th century, particularly among more adventurous eaters appreciating its tender texture and robust flavor. The preparation involves cooking the beef tongue until tender, peeling it, and then slicing it thinly to serve atop the chosen base. The dish is typically garnished with a sauce that complements the rich flavor of the tongue, adding a zesty or spicy kick. Beef tongue canapés were appreciated for their gourmet appeal at sophisticated gatherings. Sweet potato and apple casserole is pretty much the same thing as the glazed dishes you've seen so far. In execution, no, it's a lot different. In concept and theory, nothing hits like something sweet. Again, people had a focus on things that were sweeter because they were seen as a sign of care and consideration. You know, haven't you ever offered your friend some ice cream or a night out with some desserts when they were down in the dumps? While a plan like that is a lot more likely to work for your buddy that's stressed over not getting a text back, it doesn't really do much for people who are grieving. Still, it's better than nothing, and it is a sign of support. Also, lots of families would have kids that they either would not know how to explain the situation to, or they couldn't take care of their meals for a while. Dishes like sweet potato and apple casseroles were such a hit with kids that it became almost impossible to not have these as a funeral food if the family did decide to serve any kind of food. Unfortunately, store-bought alternatives mean that home-cooked desserts like this have fallen out of favor with the public. You can't possibly have a conversation about forgotten grandma desserts and not bring up the infamous blackberry cobbler. This one was a summer favorite when blackberries were in season and at their peak of flavor. So, cobblers have their roots in early American history. Pioneers who traveled across the country had to make do with what they had, and traditional pies were difficult to bake on the road. Instead, they would cover the fruit with a layer of biscuit dough or batter and cook it in a Dutch oven, creating what we now know as a cobbler. The blackberries didn't only give the cobbler some flavor, but also packed it with antioxidants. This dessert was particularly famous in southern states and was a staple at many southern family gatherings, church picnics, and barbecues. French Americans continued to leave their mark in history with raspberry Bavarian cream cake. Not a cake you would taste regularly, but it was one of the most dominating picks for any kind of feast or festivity. In a Bavarian, you could expect custard folded with whipped cream that had then been made solid with gelatin. Sounds like a sugar rush, doesn't it? People with an itch for sweets definitely thought so, back in the 1930s to 1940s when this was everywhere. The cream angles base made it not only a wonder for the tastes and the senses, but it also made you feel pretty fancy when you ate it. You know the kind of cakes people buy to show that they have money? Bavarians kind of became like that. Flavors are ever-changing in America, as you guys already know, and people got tired of gelatin. Whipped cream was not something America will ever let go, though. Jellied tomato aspic is a unique dish made from tomato juice and gelatin, often molded into decorative shapes. This retro appetizer became popular in the early to mid-20th century, particularly in the United States, where it was served at luncheons and elegant gatherings. The aspic is made by combining tomato juice with gelatin and seasonings, then chilling it until set. The result is a tangy and refreshing dish with a distinctive texture. Jellied tomato aspic is often garnished with celery, olives, or shrimp. The dish's bright color and unusual presentation make it a memorable addition to any table. Jellied tomato aspic was considered a sophisticated and healthful choice, often served with salad greens or as an accompaniment to main courses. Bread puddings aren't really something a lot of people think of as synonymous with funeral food, to be really honest. Bread puddings have had a lot of different moments to shine throughout American history. They were the perfect Depression-era dessert. It was something even soldiers ate. Still, at a funeral? I don't know. I mean, I did say being sweet helps because it's comforting, but this is also just bordering on being too much, don't you think? At least, I feel like loads of people started feeling that way too. In the 1990s, lots of people started to move away from egg-based dishes, especially ones that were really heavy to eat too. Also, most people think of bread pudding in really positive contexts, like a nice little holiday meal or a brunch dish. It seemed a bit weird to be bringing a dish fit for celebrations to a funeral, so naturally, people stopped making it entirely. This was really more so the kind of thing you would always have in celebration of something, or just as a way to get rid of stale bread and repurpose it. So it was nice to keep it with only those connotations and not depressingly traumatic ones. Since we're on the topic of pies, cherry pie was another one of Grandma's culinary masterpieces. This was the kind of dessert that made any bad day 10 times better with just one bite. Traditionally, cherry pie was made with sour cherries rather than sweet cherries. Morello cherries were one of the most common kinds of cherry used, but other varieties such as the black cherry were also popular. So, cherry pie is considered one of the most iconic pies in America, second to only apple pie. There's a famous story about young George Washington chopping down a cherry tree and then confessing to it saying, "I cannot tell a lie." Legend says this cemented the importance of cherry in American history and inspired our grandmas to add the fruit to their delicious desserts and meals. Cherry salad was another popular dessert back in the day. Cream schnitters were maybe the closest American bakeries got in that time to hitting the jackpot. A dessert that, no matter the season, time of year, or holiday, would sell to every blue-eyed youth, doting grandma or suburban family in any state. You might think we are just saying it for dramatic effect, but wait till you hear about how this tastes. Puff pastries sandwiching a thick but extremely sweet and milky vanilla custard. If you ever walked into a bakery with one of these, your mind kind of stopped thinking rationally, really. Whether it was the vanilla frosting or the aroma of sweet bliss the average man could not resist. Creme schnitte is something we dearly wish we could try too, because of how simple yet sweet it sounds, but it is so hard to find a bakery that sells a good one nowadays. Deviled crab is a rich and flavorful dish made with crab meat, breadcrumbs, and seasonings, baked in a crab shell or ramekin. This appetizer originated in the southern United States, particularly in Charleston, South Carolina, where it became a staple at dinner parties and special events. The crab meat is mixed with breadcrumbs, mayonnaise, mustard, and spices, then baked until golden and bubbly. Deviled crab is often garnished with parsley or lemon wedges, adding a fresh touch to this classic and comforting appetizer, ideal for any seafood lover. The dish is often prepared using blue crab, a popular variety in the region, and the crab shells are typically used as serving vessels. Maple-glazed root vegetables were some of the nicest meals you could come across at a funeral. If you ever had the experience of attending one in Vermont or New Hampshire, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Throughout the 1800s and 1960s, this dish was basically the go-to item for all kinds of funeral foods. It was something that was basically a gigantic mix of carrots, sweet potatoes, turnips, parsnips, mushrooms, and whatever other kind of root vegetable you could throw in. All of this would be tied up in a neat little roasted maple syrup bow, therefore creating an incredible balance between the overwhelming earthiness and savoriness of these dishes and the sweetness of the glaze. Now, root vegetables were something that would last you through any kind of winter, so it makes sense why these were so popular before the dawn of modern refrigeration. Plus, the reason you'd see a lot of this dish in places like Vermont was because they were such heavy producers of maple. Caledonia County and Grafton County in Vermont and New Hampshire are some of the top makers of maple syrup in the country. By the 70s, though, canned versions came out, so it became something that wasn't really seasonal anymore, and thus, there was a lot less interest in it. You and I both know this list would be incomplete without the mention of classic whoopie pies. Now, these come with an interesting origin story. Whoopie pies are believed to have originated in the northeastern United States, particularly in Pennsylvania Dutch country, or Maine. According to legend, when Amish women would bake these treats, their husbands or children would exclaim, "Whoopie!" upon finding them in their lunch pails. And let's be honest, we all did that little whoopie when we sighted this one in our grandma's fridge. So these were a perfect cross between a cake and a cookie. But despite their name, they were more like mini cakes than actual pies. These were the best on-the-go treats that you could just grab on your way out. Also, here's a fun fact. In 2011, the whoopie pie was named the official state treat of Maine. Chester cakes, on the other hand, were pastries more commonly associated with the Irish-American communities. But hey, go down to their side of town during St. Patrick's Day if you want slices and slices of these to go around. Think staying at home and ordering your typical chocolate cake is better? Then you do not know what you are missing. Chester cakes were these heavy and dense fruit cakes with pastry layers, filled with dried fruit, making it all kinds of yummy. People who had one knew that the experience had to be shared. Dragging your friend along to an Irish pub for one of these was not too uncommon of a Saturday evening plan back in the 70s. Currently, people have much more different ideas of weekend fun, but a Chester cake and some tea were unbeatable once. Oysters Rockefeller is a luxurious appetizer made with baked oysters topped with a rich sauce made from spinach, butter, and breadcrumbs. This dish was created in the late 19th century at Antoine's Restaurant in New Orleans, where it was named after John D. Rockefeller due to its rich and indulgent ingredients. The oysters are topped with a mixture of sautéed spinach, butter, and breadcrumbs, then broiled until golden. The result is a decadent and flavorful dish that pairs well with champagne or white wine. Oysters Rockefeller has become synonymous with fine dining and special occasions. The dish's distinctive green color comes from the spinach and herb mixture, which is often enhanced with a touch of Pernod or other anise-flavored liqueur. Beef barley stew was a staple funeral dish that got really popular in the Northeast and anywhere with a strong European presence. This was something that originally European immigrants did bring over to our country, so it makes sense why they would go for it. The combination of beef, barley, and vegetables here is something that really adds a lot of much-needed energy on a day like this. It's easy to reheat, it has a really long shelf life, and it's a big tradition even outside of primarily European communities. Even Irish-American ones love to have barley stews because it was a way of respecting customs from the times of Old World funerals. While barley stews did not really survive by the time of the 90s, and there eventually was a preference for easier pre-made food and a general decline in home-cooked funeral meals, this was still a great dish to have. Well, rice pudding is also one that wasn't just delicious, but also healthy. Don't you love it when sweet treats come with health benefits? Talk about a good deal. So, I'm sure I don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of this one because who doesn't remember the taste of rice pudding? It started out as a way to use up leftover rice and soon became the dessert that had everyone coming back for seconds. Not only this, but rice pudding was one of the easiest desserts to make and was made with ingredients easily found around the house like rice, milk, and sugar. Rice pudding originated in Europe and was brought to the States by European immigrants. Our grandmas decide to take the classic dessert up a notch by adding some key ingredients like vanilla, nutmeg, maple syrup, or cinnamon. Now, with the change in tastes and trends, this one never made it to big restaurants, but let's be honest, Grandma made it better than any Michelin star chef could possibly have. It's something about making sweet treats with a whole lot less sugar and a whole lot more love. Cheese and cracker trays are simple and elegant party platters featuring assorted cheeses and crackers. This versatile appetizer lets guests mix and match flavors to their liking. The tradition of serving cheese and crackers likely dates back to the 19th century when cheese was often served as part of a dessert course. Cheese and cracker trays typically include various cheeses like cheddar, brie, and blue cheese, paired with assorted crackers, fresh fruit, or nuts. The key to a great cheese and cracker tray is variety and presentation, balancing flavors, textures, and visual appeal. This appetizer is a classic choice for wine tastings, holiday parties, and casual gatherings, allowing for easy customization and encouraging socializing. The simplicity and elegance of cheese and cracker trays make them timeless, and they add a touch of sophistication to any event. Classic stuffed shells with ricotta were these obscenely large shells of pasta that had been essentially packed with all the ricotta cheese you could fit in there. Seriously, even real estate agents aren't this thorough with using every cubic inch of space available. In Italian-American tradition and neighborhoods, especially places with a dominant presence like Brooklyn, Queens, and South Philadelphia, you would see these a lot throughout funerals. They were a rich combination of all things that Italians considered comforting. You had cheese, sauce, and pasta, and that was familiar and filling enough for all kinds of families. Plus, I can't undersell the tradition part enough. Neighborhoods like Bensonhurst, Arthur Avenue, and South Philly's Italian Market always had non-stop pasta-based funeral dinners, and it was seen as a way for people to connect over a plate of food they've all spent their lives enjoying. While sure, by the 2010s, recipes like this had faded and people were more into light pasta dishes as well as takeout, but it doesn't mean there's no place for classics like these anymore. I think it's fair to say that apples were a crucial part of whipping up desserts back in the day. But hey, apple pie wasn't the only sweet treat we got out of this fruit. Remember Grandma's apple dumplings? These were made by wrapping a whole or sliced apple in dough and then baking it until golden brown. And Grandma's apple syrup topping was like cherry on top. This was a labor-intensive dessert, which is pretty much why it's associated with Grandma's kitchen. The process of peeling, coring, and stuffing the apples and then carefully wrapping them in dough was a true labor of love. This one was commonly enjoyed as a dessert, but no one judged you if you ate it as breakfast. I mean, pair it with a cup of coffee and your taste buds will thank you. Comfort food and pastries have a long history, and coffee cake rings are solid proof. Coffee cake rings were one of the pastries you would get to cheer yourself up on a bad day or bring to a friend as an apology or just order when you felt like being lazy and alone. Coffee cakes were not typically yeast-based, but this one was, and it would come with a generous topping of streusel or any icing of your pick. What people loved most about the coffee cake rings were how they got that coffee flavor just right. Not too overbearing or too vague, but just right in the middle where it felt like you were actually having coffee-flavored cake. In today's economy, though, people would definitely rather whip up a cheap cake on their own. Coffee cake rings were expensive in their day, and when the flavor went out of season for a bit, they took a hit with the public and never recovered. Known as dolma in the Mediterranean region, stuffed grape leaves are a classic dish that became popular in the United States during the 20th century, particularly with the rise of interest in international cuisines. The leaves are typically filled with a mixture of rice, pine nuts, and aromatic herbs like dill and mint, and often include ground meat. They are rolled into small logs and usually served cold with a side of yogurt or lemon slices. The popularity of stuffed grape leaves in American parties can be attributed to their exotic appeal and the ability to be made in advance, making them convenient for hosts. Their intricate preparation and refreshing taste made them a staple at many gatherings. On the other hand, spinach and artichoke lasagna is something of an odd one. It's not exactly solid enough that I would call it a big part of funeral home culture and tradition. It isn't a regional speciality where you could walk into the area and immediately hear about how everyone has an ongoing obsession with this recipe. It kind of just came and went as a little blip in the long list of funeral foods that have come and gone. This was all around the 80s, by the way, after America was trying to come off of its casserole roller coaster, which lasted all throughout the 60s, mind you. In urban areas, it was really popular to make something like this, not just because of funerals, but because people there were already making the shift towards vegetarian-based lasagnas. It was one of the best things to bring at a potluck, and that goes for a lot of the dishes you'll see here. They're really just slightly modified versions of things you would normally see at a potluck, because whether it's a celebration or a funeral, the idea behind a lot of these recipes is to ease your mind and bring some warmth to your heart. Next up, we gave the rhubarb pie. This is another one of Grandma's treats that wasn't too sweet or heavy on the stomach. It was a springtime hit made with fresh rhubarb sugar and often a touch of cinnamon or nutmeg. Rhubarb grows abundantly in gardens, and this recipe was the perfect way to use it up and celebrate the flavors of the season. Remember when we'd wait all year long for spring to come just for a slice of this one? Well, some grandmas canned or froze the rhubarb to use throughout the year. Rhubarb is naturally quite tart and can be too sour to eat raw. In pies, it was typically paired with sugar to create a more palatable and balanced flavor. Grandmas often experimented with different amounts of sugar and other ingredients like strawberries to complement the tartness of rhubarb. Eccles cake was similarly something that Americans had a grip on that was not entirely in their control. When you have really tasty pastries, it becomes very hard to stop having them, and Eccles cake was no different. By the way, you can thank British Americans once again for this, because an authentic Eccles cake was something only they made. If you wanted a proper Eccles, you would go to your UK buddy and hope to God his mom has a recipe. Or you could go to a bakery specializing in British pastries, and believe it or not, there used to be a lot of those. Eccles cake is filled with currants in a small but perfectly sized pie for one person. Actually, maybe the size could use some work since people could not stop at just one of these. In the present America, even if you go into British American neighborhoods, you would not find an Eccles on a table or one being made. And while that's not a lot of solace, it's definitely something. And it's a small gesture that communities usually make for their people. Not all food is really heavy either. Like, for example, we have herb-infused wild rice pilaf. This was a really common funeral dish throughout the early 1900s, and it had a resurgence in the 80s as well. If you went to Minnesota or Wisconsin during those times, I'd be fairly surprised if you never encountered a plate of this. See, this is what I mean though. The dish doesn't necessarily have to be a big feast or something that would be fit for a family of 4, but it has to be something that's easy to handle, easier to eat, and the kind of meal that at least heals your body. Wild rice dishes wouldn't stay popular for too long though, and even their resurgence in the 80s was short-lived. As a grain, this just stopped making the cut. People traded in their bags of wild rice for more couscous and multi-grain bread instead at some point. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us which one of these wedding dishes you would like to try out.